Harriers, the deadliest birds in the sky. Air cover for the U.S. Marines.
When you drive a car, you have to think in 2 dimensions. Pilots of the Harrier, we have to think in 4 dimensions. You can never really relax. As soon as you relax, then somebody's going to shoot you.
Harrier strike, next. The coast of North Carolina, U.S. Marines, shock troops, the masters of amphibious assault. Storm ashore is part of a vast war game. Overhead, Harrier jets provide close support, blasting a path for the Marines on the ground. Offshore, the amphibious assault ship USS Kearsarge, one of a new generation of assault ships. Her flight deck is specially designed to accommodate Harriers. The Kearsarge is home to a Marine Expeditionary Unit, a kind of international SWAT team at the call of the U.S. President. Deployed at trouble spots around the world, the unit can launch an invasion, rescue imperiled Americans, or simply show the flag. Aboard, 700 elite troops. Marines have a reputation as the toughest members of the U.S. military. They are also among the most highly skilled. Major Tom Bruce leads the Kearsarge's team of Harrier pilots.
Every Marine, whether he's an artilleryman or a pilot or a tank driver or a supply guy, goes to the same 6-month basic training. And it's 6 months of humping through the woods with a pack on your back, eating MREs, digging holes, and learning to be a grunt, learning to be an infantryman. When it came down to selecting what type of aircraft I wanted to fly, the options that I had were to be a fighter pilot or to be an attack pilot. And to me, being an attack pilot is what Marine Corps aviation is all about. We drop bombs on the enemy for the Marines on the ground, and the Harrier does better than any other airplane. Practice close air support every single day. That is our meat and potatoes. We do that. We eat, breathe, sleep, close air support.
Close air support, the most dangerous and delicate mission in military aviation. Pilots must sweep across the battlefield at treetop height to clear the way for attacking Marines.
The strength of the Marine Corps is in the infantry. The Harriers are supporting arms. We are there to support the Marines on the ground, and that's our only purpose. There's Marines on the ground that need us.
The USS Kearsarge is a floating war machine. As well as Harrier jets, she launches troop-carrying helicopters, the CH-46 and the monster CH-53, the Super Stallion troop and cargo carrier. Air-cushioned landing craft fly out of her well deck, loaded with Marines, tanks, and artillery. The Harrier is the Marine's most flexible and deadly weapon. Armed with sidewinders, it can engage and destroy enemy aircraft threatening a landing force. For its close support mission, it carries everything from laser-guided bombs to a Gatling gun. The Harrier can take off vertically from the Kearsarge's flight deck, but a short conventional takeoff run enables it to carry more fuel and pack a bigger load of weapons. Below the busy flight deck, Tom Bruce briefs Harrier pilots on the coming war game.
There's going to be a lot of other airplanes out there. There's going to be a lot of helicopters out there. Min altitude for runs without helicopters inside is going to be 1,000 feet or higher. And we need.
As leader of the Harrier detachment, Bruce is responsible for the safety of his fellow pilots.
Below that, I don't want to see any lower than 500 feet, even in the run. So be heads up.
A Marine intelligence officer pinpoints threats that will confront the Harriers. In this war game, North Carolina becomes the imaginary country of Cartuna. Cartuna has been invaded by a larger neighbor. The Marines' mission: drive the enemy out of Cartuna.
And his location gives him a very good field of view and a very good terrain for using his radar at the higher altitudes as well, sir. We've got another surface-to-air missile system located right here on the south part of the peninsula. We don't know who owns that anymore. The surface-to-air threat would be medium leaning towards high, sir.
Yeah.
The area is riddled with SAM and AAA sites. Enemy aircraft may attack the Harriers.
The odds are very good that if they have any air left, that's where they'll commit it, sir.
Every flight involves painstaking preparation. In advance of takeoff, the flight deck is crowded with mechanics, technicians, and flight deck crew. In the end, the success or failure of any mission rests with the pilot.
Stand clear of the foul line while we're blocking Harriers.
He must absorb and make use of a mass of information.
I can electronically input the threats and where they're, what ring, what radius would be an area I would want to stay out of. Start picking out the routing, and then putting together cards that show up in the aircraft electronically that tell us the details about whatever the flight's going to be. Finally, right before the brief, and the brief's about 2 hours prior, we'll take all the electronic information that we gathered over the last 24 hours and punch it into a brick. It's a metal box about the size of a brick that we put into the aircraft when we go fly, and it transfers all the data that we had just gotten into the aircraft, and the aircraft is as smart as we are on what we want to do. We have specific routing that we have to fly in order to make sure that we're identified as friendly aircraft as opposed to enemy aircraft, because the enemy doesn't know the little checks to fly through.
Heads up on the flight deck, launching Harriers.
Flying a Harrier requires an exceptional level of concentration.
When I take the controls, when I strap on that jet, the only thing I can be thinking about is flying.
The Harrier can be a touchy, unforgiving aircraft. After a series of crashes, the Marines decided that Harrier pilots must be the cream of the crop.
We fly fast in the target area so that we don't get shot. So what we've got is we've got FACS, forward air controllers, and they have a radioman with them, and they hold the radio handset in their hand, and they look over their shoulder, try and find us and call us in.
From when we last passed, I have 2 away. Your closest hit, sir, being 181 at 4:30.
As a veteran of the Gulf War, Tom Bruce understands the importance of the Marines' unrelenting training regime.
Targeted this time.
What I remember from the training prior to going to the Gulf was that there were so many things to think about and try to make sure that I did this and I did that and I did that. And that's the way we train now. And we just try and stress pilots as much as possible to the point where they can't do it all. If they're doing everything in the sortie, then we're not tasking them enough. And that's vital to make sure that we're ready to go to war.
1-4, you cleared in hot, sir.
The Kearsarge's mission is to cruise the oceans ready for action. She will leave immediately after testing the entire ship's company in the coming war game. There is a poignancy to every moment Tom Bruce spends with his wife, Tammy.
My wife is my best friend, and she's got a lot harder job than I do in this relationship because she's the one that stays home with the familiar surroundings and me missing. And I can't even imagine how hard it is on her. All I can do is imagine that it is very hard. And I miss her. I miss her a lot. It's not easy leaving. It's not easy putting in, leaving before sunrise and coming home at 9 o'clock at night, day after day after day, and getting ready to go is as bad as, is worse than actually being gone. On the ship, work is there 24 hours a day. You're never more than 820 odd feet away from the office.
For Tom Bruce, being an attack pilot is more than a job, it's a calling.
Heads up on the flight deck, engaging rotor blades, spot 5, heads up.
Good to go, sir? Good day. All right, ready for another one. All right.
The quiet before the storm. In a few hours, the war game begins.
Heads up on the flight deck, launching Harrier.
But first, how the Marines became the masters of close air support. World War II, the Pacific island of Guadalcanal. In a strange way, the story of the Marines and the Harrier begins on this remote island. It begins as well with a Marine pilot who flew in the Pacific War. Now a retired Lieutenant General, Tom Miller went on to fly combat missions in Korea and Vietnam. He was a leading military test pilot, and he ended active service as head of Marine aviation. He played a key role in the development of the A-4 Skyhawk, the F-4 Phantom, and the Harrier.
The Battle of Guadalcanal, of course, is probably one of the most famous battles in World War II. The Marines were put ashore to capture this airfield. The problem was that the Marines that were landed at Guadalcanal were surrounded by a larger Japanese force than there was U.S. Navy to help protect.
At Guadalcanal, Japanese aircraft drive off the American fleet. For long periods, the Marines are abandoned. They survive because of a partially completed Japanese airfield, Henderson Field. Into Henderson come supplies, reinforcements, and Marine fighter bombers to help the hard-pressed Marine riflemen. Since Guadalcanal, Marines have insisted on the need for Marines in the air to protect Marines on the ground.
We Marines pilots always wanted to be supporting our own ground forces. There's a closer camaraderie with the guy on the ground. We're trained, they're part of the family, and we feel we can do a better job just because of our motivation.
And Guadalcanal for the Marines conclusively demonstrates the need for close air support in amphibious landings.
The reason close air support is important to the man on the ground is in highly mobile warfare, the Marine infantryman requires usually heavy firepower to kind of pave the way for his operations. So really, the ground trooper looks at aviation as mobile artillery.
The Marines show the world what close air support means in Korea during the retreat from Chosin.
You have a small Marine force well up into enemy territory, totally surrounded by much larger forces. Only one way out down a road, and the weather was terribly cold, snow, the men with their feet freezing. The movement of getting out of there was almost miraculous and would not have been successful without the close air support that was able to keep the superior ground forces of the Chinese and North Koreans from overrunning these forces.
In Vietnam, the Marines discovered the need for speed in providing close air support.
Most ground military battles are generally decided in about 30 minutes. The ground commander at that point finds himself in a situation that is very tenuous, and whether he's going to survive it or not, he calls for his air support. And if that air can't get to support the ground commander within that 30-minute period, the battle is over. Once we proved the advantages of an airplane that had the vertical takeoff and landing capability, we recognized that we needed the fighter and attack airplane that provides a close air support that had that same capability, so that it could respond and it could operate synergistically with the helicopters.
American designers and engineers scrambled to meet the Marines' requirement for a fighter bomber that can take off and land like a helicopter. Initial attempts are disastrous. The X-13 Vertijet demonstrates that vertical takeoffs and landings are possible, but it's all it can do to lift itself off the ground. The X-18 is an experiment in a tilt-wing aircraft. It and the XC-142 take off using giant counter-rotating propellers. Ryan Aircraft's XV-5. Its jet engine drives big fans in the wings. Two are built, both crash, killing their pilots. The British find the solution. Their Kestrel is raised and lowered by vectored thrust on a pillar of air from its jet engine. It's simple, it works, and it has military potential. Hawker Siddeley and Rolls-Royce, without government money, take the best of the Kestrel, improve it, and in 1968, come up with the Harrier. The Harrier catches Tom Miller's attention.
I first heard about the Harrier, I was in Headquarters Marine Corps as in charge of what we call the Air Weapons Systems Requirements Division. I suggested my boss, I said, I know this sounds like a boondoggle, but I think some of us ought to go over to England and take a look at this machine.
Miller has first to deal with a ticklish political problem.
I had asked Lieutenant Colonel Bud Baker to go over to the Pentagon and investigate how would we go about buying an airplane from a foreign government.
The problem is with Congress. Some congressmen vowed the U.S. will never buy a foreign-made aircraft.
Consequently, when we started to look for the Harrier, we knew that we were treading on very thin ice and that everything had to be done pretty quietly with no indication that we were going to buy anything from England or anything.
The 1968 Farnborough Air Show. Miller meets Harrier designer John Fozzard and test pilot John Farley. Miller has slipped into Britain in civilian clothes.
We were undercover, there's no question. We wanted to be sure that the press didn't pick up something that was taken out of context.
Miller is anxious to fly the Harrier. The British are reluctant to risk their aircraft, but on the final day of Farnborough, they give Miller the go-ahead. There are no two-seater Harrier trainers, Miller is on his own in an unorthodox aircraft. The British film his flight.
I was going to make the first liftoff, and the briefing always said, now, when you take off, that there is a suck-down feeling of the airplane, that when you add the power, it doesn't lift off nice and clean. It tends to get up 3 or 4 feet, and then it just kind of chugs. It just won't go on up. So the direction that we were given was, when you go forward on the throttle, go all the way, full power. And that day, because of the weather, we had about a 300-foot overcast. When I lifted off, sure enough, as soon as I got out of that burble zone, boy, I shot up like a cork out of a champagne bottle, and I was headed for the overcast very fast. I frantically started moving the throttle back, not wanting to pull it off too quick because I'd fall out of the sky real quick that way. So it was a kind of a metering process that got faster as I went up faster. But fortunately, I got it stopped just about the time I touched the clouds, and that was a real exciting experience.
Years of experience in helicopters and high-performance jets, years as a test pilot, do not fully prepare Miller for flying a Harrier in a hover. Here, finally, Miller finds the close support aircraft the Marines have been seeking. He plunges into a furious round of congressional lobbying, staking his career and the reputation of the Marine Corps on an untried aircraft. The Marines win out. A year later, they buy 30 British Harriers.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to McDonnell Douglas Corporation and the AV-8B Harrier II rollout ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the AV-8B Harrier II.
It takes 10 years for McDonnell Douglas to manufacture the first U.S. license-built Harrier. The Harrier is not tested in war until 1982, when British Navy Harriers headed to combat in the Falklands.
First real combat operations of the Harrier came in the British involvement in the Falkland Islands. There was some 28 air-to-air victories, and not a single Harrier was ever shot down in an air-to-air victory. So the concept of the Harrier as a fighter proved itself very well.
1991, Operation Desert Storm. The Harrier is assigned to destroy Iraqi artillery capable of delivering chemical and biological warheads.
And the Harrier was the ideal airplane because it could get to an artillery piece within seconds from the time it was fired, and they essentially took out most of the Iraqi artillery. The Harrier dropped more ordnance and performed more tactical missions per airplane than any other airplane in the war. And that's a pretty good success rate. And I have to say, I was just so proud to have been involved in it. It's been real heartwarming.
Next, how the Harrier hovers. Like its namesake, a predatory falcon, the Harrier is designed to attack. Its vertical takeoff and landing capability frees it of the need for vulnerable airfields. It has the firepower of a fighter bomber, the maneuverability of a helicopter. The American-built Harrier II Plus has advanced avionics and radar, a lighter airframe, and a more powerful engine. Major Tom Bruce provides a technical tour of this remarkable aircraft.
This is the Harrier, and I'll just describe everything that it does, starting out with how it hovers. It's the first question I always get at air shows is how it hovers, and I can explain how the Harrier hovers, the entire V-stall aerodynamics with this pen. Everybody understands how a regular, normal jet works. If this is the thrust that comes out of the jet, it always goes backwards on a regular airplane, okay? So that makes the airplane fly through the air. And it has wings on it and a tail that use the wind going over the wings and the tail in order to steer it through the air. Those are aerodynamic control surfaces. Well, if you can imagine then, if you just took the engine out of a regular airplane, out of a jet airplane, and tilted it pointing straight down, okay? That's what a Harrier does when it hovers. The problem is that those aerodynamic control surfaces, the wings and the tail, no longer are effective when there's no wind going over them. So they had to come up with a different idea, and those are called reaction controls. All you have to remember about a V-stall aerodynamics, the whole thing, this pen, is that the column of thrust from the engine goes straight down, and we have reaction control systems instead of aerodynamic control systems that keep us stable in the hover.
The key to the Harrier's agility, big movable nozzles that vector or direct the thrust of its powerful engine.
There's 4 nozzles that we can point directly down. Here's the cold nozzle here, hot nozzle back there. This is the exhaust of the aircraft. A regular aircraft would have the exhaust coming straight back. This nozzle can rotate all the way down to pointing straight down, and that's what we'd use to do a vertical takeoff. This nozzle pointing straight down to the ground, put the power up, and the aircraft lifts straight off the ground. When we're doing a rolling takeoff, we'd have them pointing almost straight backwards until we get up to a certain speed, and then we pull this lever in the cockpit that causes the nozzles to come down about halfway. And then the aircraft will jump off the ground, and it'll share lift between the thrust coming out of the engine and then the wings. And we put the nozzles back farther and farther, and it gets faster and faster until finally the nozzles are all the way aft. And when the nozzles are all the way aft, it's just like any other aircraft.
The Harrier doesn't spend much of its time performing like any other aircraft. It's in a class by itself.
So I got one away, all targets.
When we're coming back to land, there are several different ways we can land. We can land just with the nozzle straight pointing back, just like a regular airplane. We don't do very many of those because that's not our optimum way of landing. We can do a slow landing with the nozzles part way down, about halfway down, and that minimizes our landing rollout. We can land on roads that way. We can land on small runways. We can land on grass that way. If we want to, we can come into a ship or a small pad and do a vertical landing. And for a vertical landing, these nozzles would point straight down at the ground, and we just come in and land that way.
The Harrier uses its turning nozzles as powerful brakes to bring it to a stop in mid-flight. The transition from flight to hover tests the skill of Harrier pilots.
When we come into the vertical landing, in order to finally stop ourselves, you have to pull the nose up a little bit so that column of thrust is pointed forward a little bit. So the nozzles are pointed straight down. I lift the nose up a little bit, and then the column of thrust is pointed forward, so that slows me down even more. Another way I can do that is a braking stop. I actually have brakes on this thing. If you see the marks on the belly here, the nozzles can go actually 16.5 degrees forward of straight down. So I'd pull it into braking stop, slow myself down, put it straight down, and then pull the power back just a little bit and come down and land.
The Harrier's Rolls-Royce Pegasus engine puts out over 23,000 pounds of thrust.
The one engine that we have is a high bypass turbofan engine. A turbofan engine compresses 70% of the air a little bit without heating it up and puts it out this nozzle. The other 30% goes right through the middle of the engine, gets heated up in the burner section, which is right there, and then expanded out through the end, out the hot nozzle, and then away it goes. When you want to turn a regular airplane, you use the ailerons. The ailerons are, this whole thing is the aileron. The aileron will droop down and lift up one wing, and then the aircraft turns. Just like a regular airliner. When the aircraft is hovering, there's no wind over the wings, the aerodynamic control surfaces are not effective, so we have to have something that duplicates the aerodynamic control surface when we're hovering. And that's the reaction controls that are on the wingtip. This reaction control here is in two parts, the top part, and then there's another part that comes out the bottom. When he's hovering, he puts in left stick and it opens up this valve on the bottom, and a jet blast of air blows out the bottom and lifts up this wing and just tilts the aircraft to the left. And when the aircraft is tilted to the left, the column of thrust is tilted and the aircraft will move in that direction. This is the tail of the aircraft, obviously. The rudder controls the yaw of the aircraft. This is the reaction control that duplicates the rudder. And you can see that it opens up. If the pilot pushes on the rudder, it opens up the reaction control. Now, it does that whether he's got the nozzles down or not. It always duplicates what the aerodynamic control surface does. However, the only time it's actually energized is when the nozzles are in the down position. What it does when it's hovering is he pushes on the rudder, and this reaction control will open up in the tail, causing the aircraft to rotate around its center. The mission at Harrier is close air support. Our job is to support the Marines on the ground. The way we do that is we drop bombs, or we shoot rockets, or napalm, or cluster munitions. We just lump those all into ordnance. We deliver ordnance in support of the Marines on the ground. So in order to do that, we've got to have a place to hang the things. We haven't got bomb bays in which to store the ordnance, so we have to hang them on external racks. And that's what these are. And this rack right now is configured for a Sidewinder. Sidewinder's loaded on here, slid on, and then when we find somebody that we want to shoot it at, this would be another aircraft, it would fire directly off of this rack and destroy the aircraft. That's a refueling probe. That'll allow us to extend our on-station time when we're providing close air support and get more gas from an airborne tanker. We would tap behind a C-130 or a KC-10 and just drink gas and stay up there as long as we wanted, wait, and provide better support to the Marines if we have to stay up there for an extended period of time. Here's the radar. Well, actually the radar's in the nose here. Same radar as they have in the F-18, gives us the air-to-air and air-to-surface capability. Air-to-air capability, like I said, we fight our way in, and then we use the air-to-surface to deliver ordnance real accurately, and then we fight our way back out.
Next, Marine Harriers in a full-scale amphibious assault. D-Day for the war game. The Kearsarge moves into position off the Carolina coast, now the imaginary Cartuna.
5,
Below
4,
deck, pilots
3,
get their final orders.
2, 1, hack. 1, 2, 3, 4. At my hack, the time was 15:10.
Good afternoon. My name is Major Kruger. I'm the Air Mission Commander for the amphibious assault tomorrow. Just to update you on the situation on how the MEU and the BLT is going ashore. Tomorrow, H hours at 0500.
The assault involves all 700 Marines aboard the Kearsarge. Their guns, tanks, landing craft, every aircraft on the ship. In the pre-dawn darkness, pilots wear night vision goggles. The Harriers will protect vulnerable Marine helicopters heading to shore.
Heads up on the flight deck, launching Harriers.
Small Marine reconnaissance units probe the shore defenses. By 6 a.m., CH-46 Sea Knights are returning to the flight deck. They have flown Marines inland, well beyond the shore defenses. Marines call it air envelopment. Heliborne Marine units are ferried ashore in relays.
Heads up, engaging rotor blades. Spot 6, heads up.
All hands not involved, stay clear of the well deck, wing walls, and upper vehicle stowage.
Below, in the well deck, other riflemen smear on camouflage. They will make the run ashore on hovercraft. They are issued flares for signaling and extra ammunition for spare magazines. By sunrise, most of the Marines and all of their heavy equipment have landed. The M1 battle tank provides armored punch for the assault force. The Marine Expeditionary Unit storms ashore, a self-contained miniature army with its own support elements, armor, air, and artillery. Always overhead, the Harriers, destroying enemy strongpoints, blocking the way of Marine forces on the ground. So sophisticated are the Harrier's weapons that can take out a target from ground level or from 5 miles up.
If it's a high threat, if there are a lot of airplanes out there and there are a lot of missiles out there, anti-aircraft artillery, AAA out there, then that may drive us down to a very low profile. If there's not as much, then we may be very high. We may be at 25,000 feet, just coming down low enough so that we can acquire the target.
Roger, force re-engaging.
Gives us good standoff distance so that bad guys can't see us very well. And then we're often back to the ship before they even, know we were there. Well, the bombs go off and then they know we're there. But that's about it. That's the first warning that I want them to have, that there are airplanes in the air.
On the Kearsarge, Tom Bruce prepares his refueled and rearmed Harrier for another sortie. The battle for Cartuna has been raging for 9 hours. There is tremendous tension on the flight deck.
The Navy guys will taxi us out to the tram line, to the center line, the yellow line on the center of the ship, and up to whatever starting point we were going to be, or launch point that we're going to be on.
For the attack pilot, it's a matter of focus and concentration. First, the studied ritual of takeoff. The landing signal officer makes a last-minute check of the Harrier's control surfaces and instructs the ordnance team to arm the Harrier's bombs.
And he gives me a 2-finger, okay, and that tells me just to be ready for takeoff, and I take one more glance around the cockpit. Yep, all my checks are good, and I give him a big salute, and he touches the deck, and off I go. And center line, center line, center line, and then steel, 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 water. It's a great way to take off. As the lead, I'll be making all the communications and hold about 3,000 until we get all 4 off the deck. We're in 2 sections. A section is 2 aircraft and a division is 4. In this mission, we make an ingress to the target area at low altitude in division. I'll have the first section in combat spread about a mile apart, and then the second section about 2 miles after them, also in combat spread, offset slightly, so it would be an offset box formation going in.
X2, you cleared it out, sir.
It gives us pretty good mutual support within the division. You got 4 sets of eyeballs looking around, making sure that that the area is clear both in the air and searching for ground threats in the form of missiles coming up at the flight.
Dash 4 on your last pass. I have 2 away, sir. Your closest hit being 20 at 12 o'clock.
Harriers have a variety of defenses against ground and air threats, electronic countermeasures, and infrared suppression systems. They carry flares and chaff to confuse infrared and radar missiles.
Smoke in the air, flares, flares.
By using thrust vectoring in flight, using its nozzles during high-speed maneuvers, the Harrier is able to twist and dodge like no other aircraft.
When I come in, I'm going to have very little time to look for the target. As I'm upside down, looking up through the canopy to see the target area, because that's the easiest way for me to see is if I roll my airplane upside down and then I can just look up because all I have is glass. He'll give me a time that he wants me to hit the target. And we get those down to the second. It's a point of pride for Harrier pilots to, no kidding, have the bombs explode within, 1 or 2 seconds of when he wanted the bomb. So we have to be right on time in order to make sure that, that all the parts fit together in the Marine Air Ground team.
The Marines have landed on Cartuna, secured the beach, and are moving inland. For Tom Bruce and the Harrier, it's mission completed, target destroyed.
There's not really a relief coming off target. We fly this aircraft all the way down until it's chained down and chalked. You can never really relax. As soon as you relax, then somebody's going to shoot you. You try not to think about how dangerous it is. If you thought that you were going to eject, or if you thought that you were in danger, it would really affect, if I thought those things, it would affect the way that, that I flew. And you can't fly tentatively. If you fly tentatively, especially in this aircraft, you're going to make mistakes.
North off west.
In training, the stress level is very high in these types of missions. In combat, everything was just crystalline simplicity. It sounds complicated, but it's very easy. And the only thing you have to worry about is keeping your wingman alive, and keeping yourself alive, and putting the bombs on target. At the 10-year mark, I looked at getting out of the Marine Corps. I was concerned that the reason I didn't want to get out was because I was afraid to get out. I went back and got a master's degree in business and was absolutely certain, and I am certain, I could get out and I could make more money on the outside. So what it came down to was, I think I've had a big impact on the success of several significant missions for the Marine Corps as a pilot, and I like being a pilot.